Welcome to session 4. Today we're going to be talking about Lencioni's advantage and talking more about that right side of the Johari window. And as we talk about that, Lencioni opens his book called The Advantage that we're going to be using most of the course content from today. And he opens it with this idea, and I've got it on your participant guide for you. What's it worth to you? Imagine two organizations. That's where we're going to be right now. He starts out by saying the first organization, it's led by a leadership team whose team members are open with one another. They passionately debate important issues, but they commit to clear decisions even if they initially disagree. They call each other out when their behaviors or performance needs correction, and they focus their attention on the collective good of the organization. The other organization, it's led by a leadership team whose members are guarded. They're less than honest with each other. They keep things close to the vest. They hold back during difficult conversations. They feign commitment, hesitate to call one another out on unproductive behaviors. Often they pursue their own agendas as opposed to those of the greater organization. The question, what kind of advantage would the first organization have over the second, and how much time and energy would it be worth to making this advantage a reality? When you look at those two organizations, you're probably like, man, that first one, that's what I want to be part of. That's what I want to do. And that's where I want my church to be, and my leadership team at the church, and all of the other leadership teams that make up the church organization. That's where I want them to be. But more than likely, they're not. Most organizations tend toward the second example as opposed to the first. So as we talk about this right side of the Johari window, if you remember from last week, you need to know yourself first before you look at others. So before you deal with others or the organization at large, you've got to know yourself. That's why that's so important. It's that whole speck plank thing that Jesus talks about. Now he's talking more specifically about sin, but in general, you must know yourself before you know others, before you deal with others. There's a reciprocity of leaders and their Johari window with the window of followers when it comes to gaining this advantage. So Lencioni has written a number of books. There are all these kind of business fables about organizations and organizational development and leadership. And in this book, The Advantage, he's actually writing it as a follow-up version to a book called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. The 5 dysfunctions of a team. And the two organizations that we talked about kind of highlight those 5 dysfunctions of a team. Let's draw them up here now for you. And we're actually going to have a double pyramid. So we moved from one pyramid now to 2 pyramids. So on the one side you have the 5 dysfunctions, and on the other side you have the 5 advantages. And so and they all have 5 levels. This is in a larger version on your participant guide, so that way you have access to it. But the 5 behaviors to counter the 5 dysfunctions are these. The dysfunction is an absence of trust. All right? So as there's an absence of trust, how do you counter that? What do you do to overcome that? Well, you counter that, obviously, with a culture of trust. Well, how does that work? This is where the Johari window comes in. As you reveal more about yourself and allow that hidden to be exposed and explored by members of your team, you're gaining their trust and the opportunity, you're earning the right for them to talk more about your blind spot and give access to your blind spot and explore that. And you, as a leader, as you expose more of your hidden, you can earn the right to discover more of their hidden. They're going to be sharing that with you, and you're going to understand their thoughts, their feelings, their actions, and why they do things. So, the next level, the next dysfunction is a fear of conflict. They fear conflict. So this dysfunction of a team is a fear of conflict. Because there's no trust, they fear conflict. Because they don't want to say anything that's going to hurt anybody's feelings. It's just this artificial harmony that exists in the organization. Like, yeah, everything's good. It's hunky-dory. It's all good. We're going to be fine. Things are going to be fine. How many times have you heard that? What does fine mean even? And so there's this artificial harmony that exists in the organization. And what's actually good is conflict. And you're like, well, conflict is good? That's crazy. Conflict can't be a good thing. Conflict is a good thing. Conflict is a great thing. There's a certain level of a artificial harmony and too much fighting that is unhealthy. But right just beside the middle of this is where a good, healthy balance of conflict exists, where you can hash out the details of something. You can propose ideas. You can disagree with one another in order to build consensus and gain consensus to say this is the right way we should do it. We've looked at all the options, because otherwise you may not consider other options besides what the leader says. This way you can explore, you can discover, you can search out and really put it through the ringer if an idea is good or not. The third problem, the third dysfunction of a team is it lacks commitment. Again, look at your guide, because my handwriting's terrible, especially as it gets smaller and smaller. It'll expose a little bit of my head inside that you've probably already noticed. You thought it was a blind spot. No, I know my handwriting's bad. But a lack of commitment, all right? And so there's a lack of commitment in these teams because they fear conflict and there's an absence of trust. So they're not really committed to the team. There's just this ambiguous future. Well, I'm here for now. Things are okay for now. I can make it for now. But I'm not long-term. I'm not committed to this team or this organization or anything that's going on. That could be the leaders or the followers saying that, or both. That would be really bad. So there's this lack of commitment. Well, in the advantage, the behaviors that's good is commitment. Because there's trust, because there's conflict, you've gained consensus, buy-in, influence to say, yeah, you know what? We're committed to the goals that we decided in that meeting or that we decided in that vision planning strategy session. I'm committed to that and carrying that out to make sure that that's going to happen. The next one is an avoidance of accountability. As you avoid accountability as a dysfunction of a team, it's because of all of these other reasons. If you're trying to just have these low standards because your commitment is low and you're just trying to get to the next step, that's not okay. Punting is a terrible idea. You're just avoiding accountability. And you have very low standards. Well, how do you counter that? Lencioni says, you have accountability. You have people that are not only committed to it, but you are okay to call them out when they aren't doing that. And it's not you as a leader being able to call somebody out, but it's having peers that are able to call each other out. Hey, you're dropping the ball here. Come on. What do I need to do to help you pick it up? Is there something I could do? Can I pitch in? Have I been doing something wrong? What could I do to help you? Is everything going okay at home? What could I help with? You have this accountability to say, hey, we've committed together to meet this thing that we've had conflict about because we trust each other that we're going to get it done. And then, at the height of this, there's an inattention to results. That's the biggest dysfunction. In any organization, you've set out, you have goals, there's something you're trying to accomplish, and you have an inattention to those results. You have these rogues, just this ego that's driving everything. And you have these different egos that are driving things because the ego matters more. The position matters more than what you're actually trying to do. And Lencioni's advantage to that is he said results are what matter. Position doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who gets the job done. It's that we collectively as a team, we are achieving this. We are gaining the advantage. We're making what we agreed on and committed to and kept each other accountable. We're making sure that it gets done. So that's the advantage. But how do you gain that advantage? What do you do to do that? Well, Lencioni goes on to say more than that. So let's go ahead and get us a new fresh piece of paper. So let's take this guy, put him over here. All right. We've got a nice fresh white here. There's a 4 disciplines model that Lencioni gives to this. A 4 disciplines model. All right. And this is a circle. So now we're changing our shapes. We're getting away from our squares and triangles, and we are now in the circle realm, all right? And he has a 4 disciplines model, all right? And the way that it works is it rotates in that direction. 4 disciplines. How do we do this? Well, first, we have to build a cohesive leadership team. All right, as we build a cohesive leadership team, they commit to those 5 things that we've already talked about. That is the trust, the conflict, the commitment, the accountability, the results. Your leadership team, as you have that is where you are. So I'm going to draw a little triangle in there. That way you remember that's the cohesive leadership team that you have. So what do you do with that next? Where does it go from there? Well, second, you have to create clarity. Create clarity. So important to create clarity, because once the meeting is over, how do you reference back to that? How do you go back and say, hey, let's be accountable to that. Hey, this is what we've committed to. Hey, what are the results we're getting again? It's how you prevent mission creep from occurring. As people are trying to throw other things in, and maybe the good idea fairy takes over, it's how you go back and say, no, this is the original goal. This was the original plan. This is what we're doing. So you have to create clarity and say, what are we agreeing to? What is this goal that we're going to pursue? Third, once you've created clarity, you have to over-communicate clarity. All right, you have to over-communicate clarity. You have to come back to it time and time and time and time again, because just as I said, mission creep will happen. It's inevitable. Something's going to try to take over, and maybe a different set of events come up, and you have to go back and find out, are we creating the right clarity as to what we're doing? Or maybe we need to change our goals, our vision, and our purpose. Maybe we need to do something else. But in the meantime, over-communicate the clarity of, hey, this is what we're doing. This is why we're doing it. This is what we're doing. This is why we're doing it. This is what we're doing. This is why we're doing it. You come back to that time and time and time and time again. And then fourth, you reinforce that clarity. You reinforce that clarity, and you do that through other ways. This is not over-communicate. This is completely different from that. Think about it. Reinforce means that you're coming from different sides in order to reinforce that clarity. Some of this is going to be results. Some of this is going to be your accountability as you're going back, and how are we going to be accountable to each other. Some of this is going to be additional meetings that are needed to go back to the drawing board to say, hey, are we going in the right direction? This is reinforcement of clarity. So this is Lencioni's advantage that we've talked about, but how do we connect this back to Scripture? We have some examples from Scripture, and I'd like to look at Exodus 32 first. Let's look at an example of dysfunction in Scripture. All right, Exodus 32, the whole golden calf is going on, and we see with Aaron, we see this whole situation with Aaron where he is just not necessarily an absence of trust, but he's like, where is Moses? He's gone so long. And you really see that in the people more so than Aaron. And you see that absence of trust. And then there's this fear of conflict. You know, Aaron's just going to do what the people tell him to. Yeah, that's what you guys want. All right, well, let's do this a little bit. There's a lack of commitment. He's not committed to where Moses is at. He's not thinking about where Moses is at and what Moses is doing, talking to God. Instead, he's like, we're going to do this. He avoids accountability when Moses confronts him. I mean, by the time Moses confronts him, Aaron, all 5 dysfunctions are apparent. I mean, no, there's no results, nothing. None of that matters. He cares more about his position than anything and making sure he's still in front of the people. Well, Moses, he comes in and he takes advantage. Exodus 32:30, Moses shows that he trusts God. 32:31, Moses accepts responsibility. Verse 32, he's committed even to his own demise. Think about this second interaction with God. He's committed even to his own demise. He's committed to God's goal and his commitment and his promise to Israel. And then we see in chapter 33, verse 1, he sets aside his status, he sets aside his ego for a greater purpose of getting God's people to God's place under God's rule. He sets it aside for that. So now let's look at the advantage in ministry. How does this work? Remember that right side of the window. This is the authenticity side of things coming in. Pastors should model the advantage. You shouldn't expect this from others. Don't hide on the hard issues. Admit your weakness, but show your desire to overcome it by taking actions. This is where the conflict comes in so much. Because maybe something's being presented and you're uncomfortable with it and it's not really your cup of tea or somewhere where you feel like you're an expert, but you feel like I'm the pastor, I should be the expert in this field. Maybe it's outreach and evangelism. And you're not great at outreach and evangelism as a pastor. Maybe it's somewhere in an area that you need to grow. But you've got people in your church that are like, man, this really lights me up. I get really excited about this and reaching out to the people of our community with the gospel of Jesus Christ. And you're like, I like that idea. I've just not always been the best at that. And there are better people than you at the church, but you hide from it because you're not the best and you're not the expert. Well, what you need to do is in that conflict and in that time of commitment, you need to admit, hey, I'm not as strong as you guys on this. I need you to champion this for me, but I also need you to hold me accountable in order to get these results because I want to be a co-laborer with you in this. Show your desire to overcome your weaknesses by your actions, not just your words. Second, you need to be available for feedback. You've got to be ready to hear that. Maybe as you're out doing the evangelism, one of the guys is like, hey, pastor, you got to take a different approach than most people in the way that you share the gospel. Did you know you're missing this rather important point? And you're like, whoa, I had no idea. Well, did you even open up for somebody to be able to explore that blind spot? Or do they just go home thinking like, man, pastor, is something off here. It might not be, what's going on with this? No, you want to have that hidden area open so that you can then have your blind spot explored and be available for feedback, that authenticity that comes from that. And you can give room for people to disagree with things as well. Perhaps you're at a meeting and you're talking about this. As you're working on that conflict, you've got to give people room to disagree. It shouldn't be just an iron fist. Once I say it, that's what we do. No, you got to give people room. Maybe you have them talk first and you hold back. You sit back and let people hash it out. And you say, I really like what Bill said, but Mary might have a better point here of what's going on. And then even after you've spoken, don't let that be the last word. What do you guys think? What does anybody else think? Do you disagree with me? You can even ask that question. That's a great question because then you say, I want someone to disagree with me. Show me a better way. If there's a better way, let's find the better way together because I'm not an expert at everything. That's one of the things you need to understand as a leader. You're not an expert at everything. I'm not an expert at everything. Remember when we first started talking in the very first session, I'm not an expert at counseling, but that's what's wanted and needed by most pastors once they get out in the field. Well, I'm in leadership. That's what I can do. So that's where I'm going to stay. That's my lane. I know my lane. I'm going to drive 55 in it and I'm going to be all good. So you got to be available for feedback and give people room to disagree. Also, open the window of the organization to people. As you open that window of the organization, it's almost the exact opposite of the Wizard of Oz. Pay attention to the man behind the curtain. You don't want people to think, oh, there must be a wizard behind the curtain making all this happen. That is an unhealthy place to be. Unhealthy. That's the very bottom right here. Absence of trust. You want to give trust to people. You want to give them that access. Information should not be hidden. So you want to give that to them. You can think back to, if you've ever read the book Sticky Teams by Larry Osborne. He says when his board was exposed to some of the issues that his pastors were facing and they were trying to work out and work through, the board began thinking more like pastors and more like leaders because they had that information. People can't think like you think if they don't have the information that you have. And so let people peek behind that curtain, get rid of the curtain if you have to, whatever is necessary. I mean, Jesus tore the veil for us. You should tear the veil for others so that they're able to see the information that you're seeing so that you can explore that right side of the Johari window and you can be more authentic. This has been Lencioni's Advantage. He has written a whole book on this. Explore the book, read more about it. He has many great things to say in there. I think any of Lencioni's work is excellent for you as a leader, and so explore more of that. And next session, we'll be talking about Sinek's golden circle. Now that we have the window, both the left and right sides of the Johari window explored, we're able to go and start setting a foundation more for strategy and purpose and goal making, those kind of things. So come back next week. The video will be released and you'll be able to talk more with me about Sinek's golden circle.